Stephan, I want you to make a note just to talk a bit about that playfulness with us as another way of engaging society or your community into a life-giving practice, and maybe refer also to the Feast of the Clowns, and what is that all about, and how you draw children in. Then the second thing I think is also important for us is to think about location. So in your work you place emphasis on location. So for us to start understanding we can make a difference where we are at. That is sometimes difficult, but so how do we sort of unpack that location and what does that mean for our engagement, also theological? I'm going to stop at those two first, and then we can carry on with the rest. But I think if we talk a little bit about, because in the conversations we hear a lot about, I'm an individual within a system, so how do I assert myself if I maybe am not prophetic? What are other ways to do that? And then also where people might still feel a tension between, is this really the work of the church? So how can we be present? In your book you also write about the presence of the church, so that we are present, we can also be present in a different way that has social significance. So maybe.
Okay.
Thanks.
Shoot, those are like 15 questions there. So I'll just throw some ideas, eh? Is that fine? Maybe I'll start with the last one. I think trying to be a prophetic community doesn't mean we all have to be the same, and we all have different functions. I think, and I still see the picture, I think back to Feast Must Fall on our campus. Strangely, I think Feast Must Fall helped me to stay at UP. Because, you think the struggle is out there, and then Feast Must Fall happened, and I realized the struggle is right in here. And there was one young woman, an Indian woman from Durban, very sharp, she's now an architect. She was part of Feast Must Fall, but she was like the mother. She was not at the front, and she was not in the fights with the VC, but she always carried water and made sure the students were feeling refreshed. It was wonderful to see. So they had different functions. There was a full gospel church that had some of the EFF students, which is strange. I mean, this was a full gospel church led by an Afrikaans guy from Queenstown. What is it called now? He was there, and the EFF students gathered there and felt safe there. So different people plugged into, and I just use this as one example, brought the little bit that they had, contributing to the bigger struggle, and that's great. So we have to come at it also authentically. We can't become something we're not. So that's one point. On location I think is important, and I think in the Bible it's important. We don't have people say we speak of grace and not space. There's a lovely book, Geography of Grace, by Van Dyke and Rock, that tries to kind of uncover this a little bit. How important is geography and space and locality? And I mean, the incarnation is teaching us about that. God became human among humans. And for me, at its deepest theological reflection is actually, to really simplify it, is to ask, how does the Word want to become flesh today in the different spaces where we find ourselves, in the different struggles? How does God want to become real and human among us? And how is the church supposed to do that? And how is theological education supposed to do that? And then which localities do we identify with and are we in solidarity with? And do we allow to teach us? So I think location is important. Positionality, it's also a self-reflective question of what is my positionality. And I think many of us are called to be liminal, in these in-between spaces. So to be in the academy, for example, but to also be on the streets and to allow the languages of these two places to speak to each other. To bring research to bear so that there's good policy that can integrate homeless persons, but also to allow the persons with experience of homelessness to help inform the research and what is documented because they know best. So in these liminal spaces between the church and society, between the academy and the streets, I think that is for me part of the importance of location. But then also long-term presence in the same direction long-term, because I mean it's not about quickly in and out. So for example, we have a project called the Urban Studio where I work with 6 sites across Tshwane, and it's long-term. We're not going to necessarily move out quickly. It's not, okay, we do research, we write an article and we're out. It's kind of research as solidarity, documenting the narratives, providing some capacity. Sometimes the data becomes part of people's own local activism. So it's long-term solidarity with specific so I speak location in different ways. Maybe just on I think your first question, what was it? It was about sustaining the play and
the playfulness and the feast of the clowns and
yeah. So a lot of this sounds like a lot of work, which it is. But so there are there's a movement that I was part of called the Tshwane Leadership Foundation, and it created different caring communities, it created the social housing company, it created the training institute. And what kept it going, and unfortunately a lot of that has become weak for different reasons, and sometimes because of Christians that forget why we do what we do. So there were 2 very, very basic, and I still swear by them, 2 very basic disciplines that we practiced that I believe kept the thing what it was. And when those disciplines, what does it say in the it says don't, now why do I get to Afrikaans today? I never speak Afrikaans in settings like this, but verwaarloos. Neglect. Don't neglect the meeting of the faithful. So don't neglect the rhythms, the disciplines, the spaces, which is the life-giving spaces. It was very simple. Every Friday for, well, at least for 28 years, there was a devotional time for 90 minutes. And there were 2 retreats a year. And those were just life-affirming spaces because people were tired and then they come together. And just remember why we do what we do. New people will come in and without big training and orientation, they will be initiated into the ways of this movement. They will feel it. It will rub off on them. It's not like you put them down and here's a manual that you work through. That doesn't work anyway. It helps, but it rubbed off on them. It was embodied. Even people of no faith sometimes joined the community and they enjoyed those moments and were part of it. I'm saying that just to say, I think the importance of that justice movements also need to have those spaces where we nurture why we do what we do and be faithful to that, faithful to each other, and we hold those spaces. And when we neglect those spaces, I can tell you, and I won't bore you with that now, I can give you a whole diagnosis which unfortunately the members of the boards of those 2 organizations wouldn't want me to tell them. I can tell them, go back and do your basics right. Then a lot of things will change. We've neglected the basics. So some of that is that. And then there's like 3 words that come to mind. Pray, play, and rest. So the retreats are that. It's places of prayer and discernment and going back to the roots. It's places of play. Play is important. So you might fight in the week, you might fight during the year, and now you play volleyball together and you're just humans together. You do stupid things together. You're clowning together, and okay, don't take ourselves too seriously. When we try to fulfill our job descriptions, but actually we're just trying to do the best we could. And it's also a place of rest, but in a spiritual sense, the Shabbat, so that we can then grow again the wings to continue with the struggle out there. Yeah, so the Feast of the Clowns is a little bit different. So it comes from that book, Feast of Fools, which you might want to find. It's 1960s, you might not find it. Where Harvey Cox was this hippie theologian at Harvard in Boston. And he wrote this book. And so around the year 2000, we once did it before and it was a huge failure, and then we did it again since the year 2000. So the Feast of the Clowns is an annual festival in the city, in the main park in the middle of the city. Probably 4,000 or 5,000 people on the day. And it has become a festival of, it started off at a time when Cape Town is different from the rest of South Africa. We all know that by now. That's why some of you want independence. But you didn't have a white flight from the inner city. I mean, in fact, it's whiter than before probably. But in Pretoria and Joburg, the white flight was quick. I grew up in the inner city in a place called Sunnyside. Between 1990 and 2000, it changed from 100% white to 90% black. Very short space of time. Which meant churches had to refigure themselves completely because all the people with money left. So they had to figure out, how are we now church? But it's also interesting, there was this narrative, God has left the city. So it's interesting, when white people left, God left. And it's a place of decay, and the diversity is bad, and all of that. And so the feast was basically to say, we want to celebrate God in the city. God is very much here. We want to celebrate the city, we want to celebrate the diversity. So that's how it started. Just as a celebration of the city and its people and its diversity and God's presence, and wanting to figure out what God wants to do here and how can we in a small way be part of undoing some of the apartheid fabric of that city. I mean, the city center of Pretoria was like, that's where the implementation of, that's where Biko was his last night in the cell and all of that. So how does that get undone? And then over the years, it became a celebration of the city, but also using art and more of justice. So what it looks like now is it's a festival for 2 weeks. There's about 30 social justice workshops for 2 weeks happening in the inner city in Mamelodi on the campus. There's a March of the Clowns on the morning, which is a playful parade that speaks to certain issues in the city. There's campaigns around children's rights and xenophobia. Probably this year it will be big, around housing justice, around HIV and health xenophobia. So kind of bringing those, and then there is music throughout the day with live artists, a lot of children, places full of kids. That's what it is. It's just a celebration of the inner city. Selena, what is it? It's actually a party. Tony Campolo wrote this book, The Kingdom of God is a Party. And actually it is. Because power has been defeated, the tomb is empty. So we still have people that carry their crosses, and we have to be in solidarity with that. But we also have to remember the tomb is open. And so there must be a party, and we live in this, in between these. That's our faith, that's the gospel. Between the cross, we shouldn't take a shortcut. I was in a church with my daughter on Good Friday, but the whole sermon it wasn't like Anglicans, the whole service was a good Easter Sunday singing and music, like the cross never happened. So we mustn't jump the cross. The cross is still with us in the bodies of people who are suffering daily. Jesus still identifies with them. But we are also people of the resurrection, which is what, if we talk life-giving, life-affirming and sustaining it, that's what sustains us. The fact that the tomb was open and there has been a resurrection and he has come for the tired and the weary. And mountains can move. I have a good friend in the desert in Egypt who believes that mountains can move. And they say the mountain actually moved in Egypt for 1.5 kilometers until the emperor believed in Jesus, and then the mountain stopped to move. And my good Reformed friend who was with me when this story was told said, "That's nonsense, there is nothing like that." But I believe the mountain moved, because if I don't believe that, I won't be able to believe that an informal settlement can be upgraded, that older homelessness can be ended, that everybody can have access to clean water. Those are all mountains that must move. And God calls us to move those mountains. And sometimes we must rest and play to be able to carry on. Says I, who don't know how to rest.
That's a topic for the pastoral carers, to help people to rest. I think that is part of our struggle in the churches, or people who are in the movements. They also need to know how to rest. It's not so easy to know how to rest. And then I'm just always sort of fascinated with the dialogue in South Africa, how we, in a sense, think that within our new situation, our old methods will work, and our old strategies, our dated strategies will bring change. And some of that might be true, but also in all of your work, you push for different ways of doing things, talking with people from other disciplines like social workers, engaging with people who are role players in the city. So you have different conversation partners, you have people from different disciplines, but do we also have to have different skills?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks. That's a very good question. I think we have to, recently the Vuyani Velum memorial lecture, Itumeleng Mosala he called himself a theological vagabond. He says he's a vagabond. So we have to be vagabonds and mavericks, I think, and do what is necessary to make change. So we have to do what is necessary to make change, and if it means the current wineskin doesn't work, this way of being a pastor doesn't work. So I was, when I was 25, I was exposed to another vagabond or maverick, Herbert Martin. He's now retired, and he lives in the deep south of the US so that he can just listen blues. But I spent 6 months with him, and I didn't know pastoral care is what he was doing. Because he was caring for people in housing projects that in winter had their electricity cut off. And he was caring when a Buddhist temple got bombed by a Christian fundamentalist group. And just from watching him, I realized, but pastoral care is not what I learned. It's something else. It's about life giving wherever it's necessary. It's about a different kind of solidarity with different kinds of people. So we have to learn those new, so different spaces. And that is true for the church. We have to find those new wineskins and be brave enough to allow it to happen. So in that Christians in the cities of Joburg and Pretoria, I was just discovering some incredible wineskins. And I realized, so what that project was, I did 61 interviews with faith-based leaders and pastors from churches in 10 areas in Pretoria and Joburg, to look at the relationship between the changing social and spatial landscapes of those areas and how Christian faith responded to that, or not responded to that. And I discovered some amazing people that I never knew before, doing sometimes small, sometimes bigger, but often under the radar. And often when I came back to my office afterwards, I felt depressed, because it was like, there is a church becoming. There's a church that's becoming out there that looks different from the church that we often in our theological schools train people for a church that doesn't exist anymore, or that shouldn't exist anymore. Was there's a church becoming. And how do we allow that church that's becoming to help us? Because it's the Spirit that's at work. How do we allow the Spirit to help us see what is becoming? Like this guy at Fuller who says the role of seminaries or theological schools is to change people for a future we don't yet know, and for a church we don't yet know. But that means theological educators like ourselves, in my classroom now, in the past I studied there when it was white, reformed and male. 90% of our students are black, 60+% are female, and the majority are Pentecostal, charismatic, AIC. The lecturers don't have a clue. We don't know the worlds of the students we are facing. So unless we unlearn and very quickly relearn, but also surround ourselves with people and bring people on board that can speak different languages, we will just fail. So theological educators, our curricula, so Emmanuel in Uganda convinced his biblical scholar to say, let's go read the Bible in the slum next to open sewage. And he says the text just changes. They read it differently when they read it there compared to in a classroom. So our curricula needs to adapt to this changing world. We need to learn new skills, and I think we also need pastors that can, and ministers and counselors and whatever we will become, who will think what is it that we need for a time such as this? What does innovation look like? And do we train people for innovation? So it's to think theologically, but also to think innovatively. And there, how do we change the classroom experience? The entrepreneurial guys here, how entrepreneurial are they, and can they help you to practice an entrepreneurial theology as well? That is just healing and entrepreneurial and innovative, because there are new wineskins necessary to confront the many issues we face in our cities. Can I just make two last comments on that? I think the ideas of think tanks, we can call it different things. UCT's African Center calls it city labs or think tanks, but places. So we have the studio, and it's exciting because diverse people come together. Sometimes I have to ask myself, how am I now a theologian here? Because we speak about housing, we speak about homelessness, we speak about all kinds of topics, different disciplines, community members, all kinds of people. I'm almost wondering, shouldn't that become the theological classroom? And then we do a reflective thing afterwards to say, what was theological about it? How do we bring all the New Testament and systematic theological things to bear on it? Because the things we do is often so acontextual that it doesn't speak into any real life thing. My last comment on that was just, I just have to mention it because that's energizing. We're talking life-giving. During COVID, we discovered in Mamelodi East, which are mostly informal areas, the campus closed down. Our campus closed down for 2 years, as if no life is there. 100,000 people across the road, the campus with all the facilities closed. The municipality closed, churches closed during hard lockdown. We discovered this amazing social infrastructure of grassroots community-based organizations who couldn't close down because it was life and death. And so a colleague of mine, Teniko, started this peer learning network, which is now 120 plus community-based groups, faith-based groups, non-profits. Just people doing incredible work under the radar, sometimes very small, but it's life-giving, life-affirming. From disability to children, to food gardens, to having guys who runs when there's a shack fire so that it doesn't spread. Literally runners, organizing themselves like that. That's now mapped, and they're busy with a story mapping thing now, where people tell their stories, and there's now a YouTube channel where they can their story, and it gives them visibility, but they also learn from each other. They're actually the city makers. They make the city there. The city doesn't. The churches often don't. The university, they make the city. But when policies are made for that area, they never listen to. So I mentioned that just to say life-giving happens in places. We have to discern it. And then we also have to make it visible, broadcast it, to make sure that the knowledge that's generated there is on our radar, because that's knowledge that's not in our textbooks. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. I want to engage a bit further on this particular point, and just saying that if I am in a church or in an organization, how do I move out of my current state of doing things and incorporate some of the things that you're saying? So in that sense, if we walk out of this room today, the small things that we can already decide can make a huge difference. That's what I hear you are saying. So if we invite a stranger to church and have a conversation with that person, it can have the potential to change us. If we know the law better, then we will know how to engage with certain matters. If we invite NGOs to our churches, so that they can come and tell us about the problems and what they are doing, we learn from one another.
Yeah.
Because I just think that if we also speak about liturgy, I know in your book you write about the Psalms and the reading of the Psalms, but I do think that the liturgy in our churches offers so much moments where we don't necessarily just have to do the traditional things, but where we can bring in the doctor or we can bring in the nurse to speak about mental well-being, or people in your congregation who work in different places. So in that regard, well, we're now on the topic of liturgy and reading the Psalms, the question about sin. And this sin that is always present in our world. How do we live with that reality that some things will be realized in our time and some things will not be realized in our time? So maybe if you have some wisdom from the Psalms, and if you think as a practical theologian that liturgy is also important.
Sure. I think those are, you already offered really good suggestions. Those small, we have to find small cracks and push and open them, and we sometimes have to create small cracks. It's those small cracks. Also those cracks in the dominant story to say, but another way is possible. It's already happening. People are doing it. We just don't want to. We have to find those cracks. Sin will always be with us. As long as we also, I think our theology around sin is also very problematic, because sin is often this individual thing that I do to you, and then I'm saved by grace and I'll go to heaven. And that's a cop-out not to do anything for the rest of our lives. And we do not always, in many of our theologies and churches, acknowledge and explore the ways in which sin has affected us systemically. The apartheid city is the fruit of sin, spatial apartheid, systemic and institutional racism, unequal education. All those are actually consequences of sin. It's the break that occurred. And so our work is to be redemptive. So another thing that Cox said that is one of my favorite lines that I draw from is, he says, one of the most critical things for the church in the city is to heal urban fractures. And so what are the fractures? Those fractures are all symptoms of sin. It's economic, it's educational, it's spatial, it's segregation between people, it's the wall on the N2. So our work is to heal But we have to identify those fractures and then work towards its healing whilst we ourselves are wounded. And that's always will be the journey. It's like between the cross and the resurrection. It will always be between the fact that we are saved by grace, but we ourselves are still wounded, and we are still in need of forgiveness from God and from each other and from ourselves. So I don't think there's a quick thing out of that. We live in a world that faces the consequences of sin. And we are trapped between the now and the not, the already and the not yet. And that is just where we are. That is where we live our lives, which is a tricky place. And that's why it's so important that it happens in community. It's not by ourselves. The liturgy, I think liturgy in the church and liturgy on the streets. I think we must perhaps explore more what it looks like liturgically on the street. So in some ways, the feast can be seen as a liturgical moment. It's a lament. It's a lament, but it's also a celebration. We don't lament. There's one of the interviews with a young charismatic pastor says we all grew up on a menu of glory. So he's angry with one of my colleagues who made a joke and said, you guys charismatics don't have a theology. He's still angry with this professor who told him that. But he says, the same professor helped me. He helped me see God as different faces. And that helped me because now all these people that grew up on a glory menu in my church are young married couples. They lose a child before birth. And suddenly suffering is real, but they don't have a theology or language that speak about suffering. So we don't have languages for some of these things. Let me. So how do we publicly do liturgy? Lament, go to the street, walk, protest sin, protest housing prices in the name of Jesus. I'm serious. Protest what needs to be protested, but also celebrate and worship. And what does our Sundays look like? Now, we come from different churches, so our understandings of liturgy is also different. But how do we, and your examples were great. Who do we invite in? Do we invite the guys from Nufuna Kwazi, for example, to explain to us what they've come up with and why do they do what they do? Or the health activists, or the people working in some of the public hospitals and face real challenges. Do we invite them in both to pray with them but also to conscientize us? Can we stop the bus sometimes? Two of the examples are young churches, Table Church. They literally started from scratch. So, I mean, the Table Church in Centurion. And they say everything is up for negotiation. Do we have to worship and sing? So they debate that. They debate everything. It's like the early church. How do we do this thing? And they specifically geared towards so-called post-church people. So they try to figure out, how are we church with post-church people? But nothing is a holy cow. Or Pabalo and them at following Jesus in North Riding, who 1 or 2 Sundays a month, they don't have worship. They go to the mall or to the pavement and they put a sign, if you want Jesus, let's pray. If you want coffee, just have coffee. And the other Sunday they go with this informal settlement church. They say they will never grow because first-time members come. They go, they worship, they put masks on. They clean the shit literally off the streets. They take the mask off, they worship, they go home, and the first-time people seldom come back. So they have a strategy for how not to grow a church. But they discern how to be church in their context, in a fresh way. So it's not just recycling. Many of our churches, we just recycle. We recycle what a colonial gospel that has very little to do with the Jesus before Christianity. If you haven't read Albert Nolan, it's the most important thing next to the Bible, is to read Albert Nolan's book, Jesus Before Christianity. Because he basically suggests we never escaped Constantine in 300 after Christ. That's still the church. And we have to find that Jesus who came and died and has risen. So my favorite liturgical moment was when we had a Freedom Sunday service. and put posters around the church, one on unfreedom and one on freedom, and just ask people. And so people just went to the walls and they wrote, where do we celebrate freedom and where do we lament unfreedom? And it was exciting because that became the sermon. We used Galatians 5. It was for freedom that Christ has set us free. But people could name where they experience unfreedom in the city, in the world, in their own lives, in politics, in economics. They could celebrate where they experience freedom. And that became, so people almost preached to each other, and we heard and listened to each other. But we cannot do any of these things if we are having holy cows and we are not willing to disrupt. And if we don't want the Spirit, we speak about the Spirit differently, I suppose. I don't know which churches you come from. But we don't want the Spirit to breathe among us because it might create chaos. It might call us to do justice. It might call us to humility. It might call us to realize all the nice ideological things we wrote about is not changing anybody's lives. Nobody anyway reads it. So we must create moments where the Spirit can have a moment to, I suppose, fall upon us. Even if you're reformed, it can happen. I'm not speaking to you, I'm speaking to myself.
Can I ask, are there any questions? I have a last question that I want to give the floor an opportunity. No question. No life-giving moments yet for you. Okay. The last question that I want to ask is, should one be afraid to get involved with justice issues? If I'm a pastor and I do my thing on a Sunday and I have a typical good congregation, or if I am a person who are drawn to these things but I don't know how to step into this world, I don't have the network that you are having, I don't know the good people, but I feel this is where I want to go. Should I be worried?
I'm just looking for this verse. Then I'll respond. You should be worried, yeah. Because it might. So Trevor is this friend. Some of the people in the room know Trevor in Tlola. I was at the book launch where Trevor spoke about Babita. What's the surname of Babita, the woman who died? Yeah. He spoke about her and he said the fact that we are all here is because we were not faithful. We will not be whistleblowers when we have to be. We will not stand for the truth. That's why we're still alive. I mean, he's always exaggerating. But he tried to make a point. And that's to your question. It might cost your life. I mean, really, to really stand for justice. Either physically, like Abaslali last week again on Thursday or Friday, another of the Abaslali was in John Dola, the landless movement. One of the members, I think already 25 were assassinated. Friday, another one was assassinated. Simply because they disrupt the land grabs by politicians at the cost of, and I mean, the one guy is a pastor and his son who's in prison, an ANC guy who is a pastor and his son who killed off some of these guys. It might cost you a lot of members. You know, there's a church in Pretoria that's not a justice church, but they happen to have accidentally 5,000 people landed next to them living in shacks in one of the wealthiest parts of Pretoria. And a few times in the last few years, they did interesting things. They became a friend of the court at one moment to prevent the shack dwellers to be moved. which a church like that wouldn't do normally. But they did it. I think they had to retrench 18, well, they have a lot of staff, but they had to retrench like 18 staff members after that. They lost millions of rands of members who left. They bowled for 7,500 members. About a third of the church is full now because, like the pastor says, for those who believe in the gospel, this settlement here is like manna from heaven. But then there are also those among us who drive with their Porsches and BMWs on a Sunday into the church and feel uncomfortable because of the African market out there at the settlement, as if we're not in Africa. And so having to walk this tightrope. So there's loss involved if we sign up for some of what we call to do. But I don't know if that's the same as fear. I don't find this verse that I wanted to share. I don't know if it's the same as fear. It's more, that's the cost. Consider the cost of discipleship. That's what it is. And we have to consider it because it actually asks of us to give our lives. But fear is something else. Fear is paralyzing. And so I grew up on this verse from my mom. And it came to mind a few times the last year. Maybe that's why I'm a little bit weird. Is that verse, as ek 'n bende storm loop, wat? Al sou ek 'n bende storm loop, ek sal niks vrees nie. What is it in English? Psalm 18 or 19. Psalm 19. I can walk into a gang and I won't fear. My feet are safe, I'm okay. So I think we have to allow God to cultivate within us a kind of a courage. And that's a question I have is how do we cultivate, it's a real question, how do we cultivate courage in theological students? Sister Anya, you must get her here. She'll drive you mad. She's in Belleville. The first time I met Sister Anya, she's an Irish Catholic. I think I told you guys. The first time I met her, there was a standoff between the Metro Police in Pretoria and refugees. I didn't know this woman. There were rubber bullets flying. The next moment I saw this little woman with white clothes and a, what is the thing they wear? The nuns?
Yeah.
A habit. Walking right in the middle of this whilst the rubber bullets are coming. I thought, I want to meet this woman. And we became good friends. She's now I think they hide her in Belleville because she was too busy in Pretoria. But my question is, how do we cultivate that amongst our students so that it might be costly, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to do it. So there's courage and cost. Consider the cost. It might be costly, but can we be courageous enough to face it and to walk with it? But we cannot do it alone, and I think some of us want to be heroes and do it alone. It asks of us to be in community, to have people that are with us, to have other people they might not be with us every day, but we know they're with us, we know they pray with us, we know they have our backs. I think the worst thing, and that happens in the church, is when people that should have your back do not have your back. They become part of the people that destroy the project. Even though they might speak and write, all the stuff you think they might speak and write. I don't know if the mic is on. Maybe I switched it off.
I don't think.
But that's the most disheartening thing.
Yeah.
For me, the most disheartening thing is not the mayor who's a crook or this one or that one. It is when fellow believers, and especially fellow believers who say they are justice-minded people, have agendas. That is disheartening. So the thief might be among us, and then we must also cast out that thief.
All right, thank you very much. So to have courage and to know the cost, but also to know that you're not alone, and to find communion. I think is what I hear from this. So thank you very much for the engagement on life-giving practices. Yeah, I hope that you would feel inspired to find something, some crack where you can shine the light into your organization or your church.